Hello, my name is John Bannon. I'm an attorney and philosopher. Today, I'm going to use superdeterminism to answer the granddaddy of all philosophical questions. Why is there something rather than nothing? Well, the first thing you have to know is that we live in a superdeterministic universe. In 2020, Swedish theoretical physicist Dr. Johan Hansen proved that we live in a predetermined static block universe without cause and effect or probabilistic causation in physics. You can read his proof in the peer reviewed journal Physics Essays, volume 33, number 2, pages 216 to 218, June of 2020. So we live in a block universe. And what that means is we live in a universe with three dimensions of space and one dimension of time. This is a familiar concept, the block universe, for those who have heard of Einstein's relativity. So essentially, if you imagine a frozen moment of time, and then you imagine stacking all those frozen moments into a hidden dimension of time. That's the block universe. That's the superdeterministic universe that we live in. It's superdeterministic because it doesn't have cause and effect or probabilistic causation in physics. Um, so in our universe, nothing actually moves. It's a static block universe. Nothing moves in our universe because movement requires flowing time, which cannot exist without cause and effect or probabilistic causation in physics. So you have to imagine that we live in this static block universe, this fourth dimensional uh, block. It's not actually a block. No one knows the actual shape, but well, it does have those different dimensions, length, width, and height, like a block. But you're adding in a fourth dimension of time conceptually. So you can think of a frozen moment of time as a slice of that block, a hyperplane of space time, and those hyperplanes are abutting or intersecting through the static dimension of time. And our appearance changes on each of those abutting and intersecting hyperplanes of space time. And that's what we experience as motion. But it's actually an illusion created by the changing appearance of particles in our brain. So as the particles in our brain change positions on these abutting and intersecting hyperplanes of space-time, that creates the illusion of consciousness and our conscious experience of movement. So nothing actually moves in the block. It's not a crystal, but it's almost like a crystal. And our experience of consciousness is an emergent property of this illusion that is created by the changing appearances of brain particles on abutting and intersecting hyperplanes of spacetime. But events themselves in our universe are like pebbles set in concrete of our block universe. They don't move. Events stay in the same coordinates of the block universe. And you can't change them. There's no cause and effect so that you could change them. So it's just one permanent, immutable, static block universe. That's what we live in. Now, our static block universe has particles in it, and those particles are organized in particular uh, uh, patterns and in a particular fashion throughout the static dimension of time. And that organization follows predictable patterns, which we call the laws of physics. So, because the laws of physics are mathematical, then our universe is statically organized to follow a mathematical pattern. and math is founded on logic. So these are logical patterns throughout the block universe. So when you realize that um, the fundamental nature of the block universe follows logical patterns, that tells you that our block universe is fundamentally logic. Now, logic itself inherently is not made of any parts. And the reason for that is if it was, then the parts that it's made of would have to be held together by its own logic. And that creates a circular infinite regress problem of, well, okay, then that earlier logic must be made of its own parts. And those parts must have their own even earlier logic. So is that, and that logic can't has to be made of parts. So you end up with an infinite regress of a logic made of parts, and parts being held together by logic. So because of that infinite regress problem, it's incoherent. It's like which came first, the chicken or the egg, the logic or the parts. So that's nonsensical. So because of that, logic itself inherently is not made of parts. It's a metaphysical idea or transcendent reality. It transcends physical reality itself. So um, now the idea of something is physical reality. And what physical reality is it's a defined logical state that excludes all other possible logical states. So, because logic itself is inherently not made of anything, when the universe is defined as a logical state to the exclusion of all other possible logical states, that defining itself comes from nothing because the transcendent logic that allows it to be defined is not made of anything. So something that's not made of anything, if it's defined into our universe to the exclusion of all other possible states of reality, then it's no surprise that our universe comes from nothing. So something is our universe. Nothing is actually the metaphysical logic that is defined to allow the universe to become something. Um, so our universe, our block universe, is a defined logical state that comes from nothing. Now, because cause and effect in physics and probabilistic cause and effect in physics is not real, then nature itself has no power to create physical reality or to define a logical state to the exclusion of all other logical states. Well, this means that you need a supernatural being or a god in order to define our universe to the exclusion of all other possible logical states, such that our universe comes into existence atemporally or outside of time and space itself. Um, so that's why there is something rather than nothing, because you need a God to do that. And God has created our universe. Now, God is the gatekeeper of the defining of logical states or the creation of physical reality. You need a being, a supremely intelligent being, that is capable of applying logic and creating the values that are necessary for the defining of a block reality like our universe. So, for example, if you think about a stick, now you can think about possible sticks. A stick could be a foot long, it could be a foot and a half long, it could be 2 feet long. Those are all possibilities. But in order for it to be defined, a freely willed, supremely intelligent being has to decide how long is it going to be, because logic itself can't tell you how long the stick is. But logic itself requires an entity capable of applying logic and setting values so that states can be defined. So God is necessary for the creation of anything, from metaphysical logic, because logic requires a God to define the values necessary, in defined states of logical existence. Because defined states of logical existence are themselves logically possible and thus part of metaphysical logic. So you need a God, and that God has to be supremely intelligent because he has to be able to know and understand everything that he defines or creates, before it's created in order to do that. So anything that exists in physical reality, including the most advanced technologies, God would have to understand those things fully before they're even created, which means God would be supremely intelligent by definition. Now, God himself isn't made of parts, isn't made of anything, which means God could not be otherwise. Doesn't have the parts to be something else or otherwise, which means God is uncaused and always existing. So there you go. That's the answer to the big question. Why is there something rather than nothing? And the answer is because we live in a superdeterministic universe, which requires a God to define that block universe. And it's that God who decides what to create and what not to create out of the somethings that we see or that are possible. All right, I'll give you a chance to read the board. All right, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time.